Hey guys, Dave from Nerdarchy, for nerds, by nerds, hang out with these nerds.
Ted.
Nathan Nerdarch.
Ryan.
And today we're going to discuss gaming the game versus experiencing the game.
Jump down in the description below where you can sign up for Nerdarchy, the newsletter, get RPG tips, as well as learn how to game with Nerdarchy.
So today we're going to talk about the idea of sort of being in the fiction of the game versus sort of gaming the game, and kind of what that means and what those two camps sort of fall into.
There's always that conflict that happens when you're playing in a game, and you want to like facilitate the game and play the game, but at the same time, they're role-playing games, so you want to delve into your character and play the character as well. So there's all these like meta aspects that your character isn't aware of, but you as the player are. Right. Like, it actually came up in one of our more recent games where Ted is throwing out these hooks, and they're kind of like as players of the game, who've played many games, read many stories, like, we know that that's the hook. Mm-hmm. And Ryan's character was absolutely going, all right, I'm going to go with the DM on this one, and I'm going to go for it. But I was being a bit of a dick, going, you know what, I think my DM Ted could do a better job. My character would definitely not follow this one. It doesn't really make that much sense to me. So, you know, Ted worked it out a little bit further along in the game, but like as a player, I knew exactly what was going on, and that's the difference of being a character that lives in that world and being a player that's playing a character that lives in that world.
Well, there's like the idea of like if you're going fishing, the bait that you use to draw on the fish and what's going to be the most alluring bait. Like it was kind of in that one instance kind of a weak bait for anybody at the table. Like it should have been, you know, the stronger bait is like narratively what works for that character, the thing that's supposed to draw and hook them in, right? So that's one aspect of it where I'm playing this game, clearly this thing's presented, that's the what's facilitating being able to have this adventure progress further. I can just grab that, or being in-world fiction.
Or Ted can get frustrated by us trying to get the people inside this imprisonment to tell us what color the sky is for like a half hour, an hour.
So there's always going to be this push-pull with you, the player, and you, the character, right? So you're always trying to... The whole idea of a role-playing game is to experience the world through the eyes of that character.
Or try to as best you can. If you care about, you or your group cares about that sort of thing.
Yes.
It's actually most worse when like only one or two people care about that specific aspect of the game and everybody else is just like playing Munchkin with an RPG.
Because then those two players are like, and all the other rest of the players are like, these guys.
Yeah, they're ruining everything with their talking.
Well, it goes both ways though. Like if you have a group that mainly focuses on one thing, but you have one or two players focused on the other thing, that's going to be the case. It's going to affect the experience negatively either way.
Expectations aren't going to line up.
Yes.
And the other thing that goes along with this idea is the idea of, so all of us living in the 21st century now at this point, 22nd, where are we at now?
Somewhere's around.
Yeah, so some century hitherto, we've had centuries of storytelling being recorded throughout history, and we can look at countless like years worth of this sort of content between reading it, watching it, listening to it, everything. Our characters have none of this shit. And like, but we take all this lore of zombies and werewolves and minotaurs and stuff into the game of our characters. Like, well, depending on the background of your character, they're no sage. Like, they don't know anything about any of this stuff. But we as players, like, oh yeah, like silver bullets or silver weapons or cut its head off. Like, no, your character 9 times out of 10 doesn't know any of that shit. Like, if you're first level, you have no experience dealing with this supernatural or oaky stuff. Like, really, like, it's crazy that adventurers go rushing headlong into danger and don't run from it, especially as a first level character, because they're not that strong. Like, most things can probably kill you as a first level adventurer. So the idea of like putting yourself in the character's position versus threats versus narrative, because we've had countless exposure to all the stories that have ever been told. Well, guess what? In that day and age, like, that character, it was kind of new to them. Like, not many people knew of that specific thing.
Aside from some oral history, like oral tradition or oral storytelling that you'd get like, oh yeah, there's this thing in the woods. And you're like, well, is that really a true story about that thing in the woods, or is it just made up stuff? And when you try and do that thing, like, oh, chop its head off. Well, its head just flies around and bites you after that instead of dying. You're like, oh, that's not how the story ended.
Yeah. So there's multiple ways to look at this, and number one, we play this game to have fun. And part of that fun is going to be what is enjoyable to you as the player, not just the character. I, as Ted, when I sit down to play this game, I am not going to be physically injured if my character dies. I will be fine. I might get upset that my character's dead, but I'm going to survive. I'm going to make it.
He's going to hate that house rule we're going to institute. The BB guns.
You take 15 damage.
Reading through, some of the Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, where the literature is okay. Well, oh my God, crap! It's a monster. We're gonna just run. To me, as a player, that would seem more apropos to a threat, because I care about my life, and it's better to just run away than it is to face that danger, because I know I'll live. But it's not as much fun to play. I don't get to be the hero. I don't get to get the loot and the experience and be able to move on and do bigger monsters, bigger battles. So that's the dynamics that I see.
Well, that's a good example, because in Lord of the Rings, you're right, they only really fought when they were forced to. Mm-hmm. They couldn't run, or if they did, there was consequences they weren't willing to deal with. Like, other people would be harmed. Mm-hmm. They were the only thing standing between them. Now, I disagree a little bit. There's always been stories. There's always been, as long as humans have been able to communicate with each other, we've told stories, right? So our characters do experience this, but the primary difference is, when we play Dungeons and Dragons or a tabletop role-playing game, we are looking at it from a third-person point of view. We get this overview of what's going on. There's a huge difference from being someone in the moment who's experiencing what's going on. We don't have to deal with. We don't have to deal with the emotions or
fight or flight reflexes. Well, yes. But sure, there's always been stories, but usually there's a shit ton of misinformation. The game Telephone, that's basically what happens. Like, the idea that nobody has it right, like 1 in 15 people are right, but you don't know which of those 15 is correct. So, like, almost I would encourage game masters out there, dungeon masters, to just create a shit ton of misinformation in our game world, and like maybe you hit that golden check of a high DC to actually get accurate information for your Sage character, but otherwise most people have it wrong.
But when I first met Natalie, who has played in some of our games, it was at Philly Games Con, and she was playing a bard, and when she would flub a roll, she would role play that role and just start making stuff up. Yeah. Which is awesome and fun. If you could get that buy-in from your players and get them to do that, and the other thing is to do it and be concise as well, so you're not like monetizing or monopolizing. That's the word I was looking for. All of the game time, but it was a fun thing that she would do when she would get a really bad roll on a knowledge check or a lore check, which is really cool, and it kind of speaks to what you're saying.
Yeah, which, I mean, if you have a really good, honest player, like the idea of like not even letting the table know what they rolled, so everybody at the party believes that this is what that character actually believes, that would be fantastic.
Based on whether or not they think the character itself has some kind of like expertise or something. Like, right. This person's smart, I'll trust them.
It comes back to the crux of the matter between, experiencing the game and gaming the game, right? So once the DM gives the information, the players know that it's actual information that the character has, unless the DM makes it up, right? But once the players start spewing off the story, the other players are going to kind of know that they're talking out their butt and making it up. So it'd be really hard to do unless you're doing a game where you're doing a lot of note passing or something along those lines. Although it would be a lot of fun, it's unwieldy, and that just speaks to like the nature of role-playing games in general, and how these things are obstacles and why it's hard to get around them.
Yeah, like that almost sounds like it would work better in a sort of virtual tabletop sort of experience, because you can just like basically I am the other player. Like, yeah, either as a GM you pass that information along, or they just go and take the lead with it as they see fit.
You don't know Dick. Say whatever you like. Yeah. Make it good.
Oh, hey, all right. Here's the scoop.
So that's always been the hard thing, and with role playing games again too. Like, then there's the other aspect of being a character from that time and place, you actually know more than your player knows as well. So, but unfortunately, you're going to
You know a lot of mundane things, right? So that's kind of the thing.
Yeah, well, yeah. If you know mundane things, you would know what it would take to do certain tasks that character does, or you're playing a character with stats that are better than your own. Yeah. If you're playing a high mental stat character, well, and you don't have those stats, it really becomes harder and harder to get inside of that character's head and become that thing, because then you really do need the game mechanics to kind of influence it and affect it.
Yeah, so I had an experience of in the game you ran for the fans in Tampa. We were facing off against a certain aberration creature that's serpentine, and I wanted to throw it in a pit. Well, from a fiction standpoint, I was imagining something like a big snake. How much can a big snake weigh? 75 pounds or whatever? So in my head, I have a certain number, and in Dave's head, he had 500 pounds. If I had that going on, a big ass snake, but not 500 pounds of snake, because I wanted to whip it around and toss it, and that was not how things went. Yeah.
Yeah, that's actually a really good example. And the character would have no issue with that because they're experiencing it. But as a player, you have to go through my narration and description. And I go, oh, it's roughly the size of a person. And in your mind going, oh, well, it's a snake, but it's as long as a person. An anaconda or a python or something like that is what you're envisioning. But I'm envisioning something as thick as a
big
person.
and bulbous. Yeah. So complete disparity of what that thing could possibly be.
So yeah, the as big as a person, that was apparently vague enough to have two very distinctive interpretations.
Well, yeah, because one is length and one is volume. So it definitely, and the monster in question was a Grick, right? So, and I think they actually kind of give the weight in there, but it's something to think about too as a DM when you're trying to give your players a world to interact with it and trying to give the best possible descriptions so that they can. And I think this is one of the problems of playing the game for a long time is you kind of some of that stuff you just start overlooking and you don't think about it anymore because you've been playing this game for 10, 15, 20 years and it just becomes
just routine.
Yeah.
It's a certain amount of information that is just ingrained in your brain and you don't really think about it. It just automatically processes.
Well, but some things too, you're queuing off of description, as I was in that instance. But you could, as the dungeon master, it's kind of beholden to you to sometimes clarify of understand that this thing is X number of pounds. It would be very challenging to do this thing. Because
I saw a cartoon. Speaking of this, I saw a cartoon. It was just like a comic strip, and it was two guys, a tiefling and some other guy, and they fell into a pit. And then the DM says a torch, and it's a pit when it's full of liquid, like oil everywhere. And then they say, oh, a little trap door opens above, and a torch falls. So they're all like, oh God, we've got to grab this torch before it hits the oil, and we all die. So they both miss catching it, and they're all lamenting their character's death. And it's and it goes plop into the water because it wasn't lit. It was a torch, but it wasn't a lit torch. So they're all freaking out immediately. We've got to catch this or die.
Yeah. Well, and so had that torch have been lit, or it's kind of well, if that was a first level party of adventurers, who the fuck makes a pit full of oil and then drops a lit torch into it? So that's a player expectation. That's not a character expectation of what that is. Maybe a 5th level rogue or 6th level rogue is has a handle on traps. Oh fuck. But anybody else that. Who in their right mind does that?
So that was clearly set up to design to invoke that reaction.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because if you're in a pit that's not lit and something's falling, you would not describe it as a torch. You would merely describe it as a stick.
Yeah.
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 That is true. Yeah, because a torch is the stick, a light.
Well, I mean, then an unlit torch would just simply be a stick with all the things needed to be able to light it easily on fire, which sticks aren't that easy to light on fire without a handy lighter or matches and stuff.
Butane torch.
Yeah, there you go. An unlit butane torch falls.
A flamethrower.
Nerdarchy, the flamethrower.
So anyway, again, it's that kind of assumption of what that word means right now, rather than when everyone thinks up something different and then acts upon that difference. So
Yeah. Well, it's the same thing too when you're running a game and like Scott with the mayor like instantly guessing that the mayor was corrupt and evil or whatever. Like this isn't like Scott's character being like so wise or insightful or whatever. It's Scott's played a shit ton of RPGs and kind of knows which way the wind blows when you have plot devices going on. Like, oh, 9 times out of 10 this character is going to be the betrayer type of situation. So that kind of creates another thing of, I mean, really, your character has no reason. Like, as soon as the dungeon master starts to set up someone to be very unlikely to betray the party instantly assumes that that's the person that's going to betray the party. So it's another problem of narrative. Like, if you've had nothing but good experiences in regard for an NPC, you as a player or as a character don't have any reason to suspect the thing coming. Well, it's because of plot device.
Well, there's always this person's too good or too nice to me, and maybe they want something out of me. Like that suspicion against, just that paranoid suspicion.
Yeah, but
Which
people
is easier
living
to do.
in the normal world don't have. It's players of RPGs who have that paranoia.
But there's another.
You would have to be like a conspiracy theorist sort of paranoid thing to always jump to those conclusions.
We have those here.
Sure, but that's basically your typecasting. It's like saying they're all paranoid schizophrenic.
Well, not all of them, but let's say Scott's character is, in Ted's campaign, the conspiracy theorist of the group.
Yeah.
So he's the one that always sees evil occultist somewhere.
Well,
And
he does.
sometimes
He
he's
does
right.
fit that role. But the other problem is the fact that our player characters don't have emotional attachments to these NPCs. It's all very clinical. Like we're experiencing, it through a filter, but we're not actually getting the human experience.
We didn't live the last 10, 20 years with those NPCs going way, way, way back.
Right, or even a year or 6 months. It doesn't even take that long, but you're not having these conversations. You're not looking at a real person. You're not touching a real person. You're not getting the full experience. You're just getting this clinical version of a relationship with an NPC. So it makes it real easy to jump to those conclusions because you don't get those good feelings that you would when you see someone that you're friends with or that's a family member or something like that. There's none of that emotional connection.
Right, you're just gaming narrative plot framework at that point.
So, and it gets to the point like, well, how far are you going to go into the rabbit hole? So it does become like the Tom Hanks movie. Was it Monsters and Mazes? Where you dive too far and you can't come back. So the key is really just finding the balance between how you're going to interact with the world, as the player and also through the character.
Right. So what do you guys think? You handle this in your game. Put your comments down below. While you're at it, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
You can patronize us in a good way over on Patreon.
Follow us over on Instagram.
Don't forget we have Facebook.
So until next time,
Stay nerdy.